The silence in the sanctuary had settled like snow, thick, heavy, waiting. Ilera stood beneath the vaulted arches, her veil catching the golden light like a net for all the eyes upon her. Her hands were still, her spine a rod of glass. She did not shift, did not flinch, did not cry. The officiant coughed once into the hush. Then the doors opened. Not wide, just enough. A gust of colder air slipped through the crack before it widened, and in stepped Duke Roland, late. His boots echoed with each step down the marble aisle, the sound louder than the trumpets that had announced nothing an hour earlier. He wore the full ceremonial uniform, dark green and gold, the medals heavy across his chest, but his collar sat slightly askew, his jaw unshaven at the edges. He looked not like a groom, but a man returning from a war he hadn't won. He said nothing, not to the officiant, not to Ilera, not to the congregation that had begun to wonder aloud if he had run. He simply stopped before her, nodded once to the officiant, and held out his hand. Not for love, not for apology, just for ceremony. Ilera placed her hand in his, and the wedding began. The vows were spoken, not in whispers of promise, but in clipped, practiced words that belonged more to politics than passion. When the officiant said, "You may now seal this bond before the eyes of Viridia," Roland only pressed his lips to her cheek, not her mouth, not her hand, a kiss given to stone. The crowd applauded as they were expected to. The Grand Duchess smiled as she was trained to, and Ilera stood a bride newly made, beside a man who had not met her eyes once since entering the room. That night, May 10th, 1881, the palace was quiet. The wedding was over, but nothing had begun. They called it a bridal suite, but it felt like a mausoleum lined with lace. The fire had been lit, the bed turned down, a glass of wine waited, untouched on a gilded tray beside the hearth. The scent of rosewater lingered faintly in the room, as if someone had tried to soften what could not be softened. But nothing was warm. The door opened behind her. She heard it, but didn't turn. His steps were slow, deliberate, heavy with ceremony, not sentiment. He didn't speak. He removed his gloves, his coat. He placed his medals on the table with the careful movements of a man used to being watched. But there was no one watching now. He did not speak, not even good night. And in the quiet curve of the bed between us, I learned what it meant to be married, without ever being chosen. The fire crackled once, then stilled. She lay awake, eyes open, staring into velvet shadows. Outside the moon watched, but inside the room held its breath, and the crown on her head felt heavier than her body beneath it. The morning after the wedding arrived, pale and silent, not with celebration but with porcelain and protocol. The morning light in Viridia was pale. It slid across the palace floors like it didn't belong there, timid and unwelcome, much like the girl now seated at the far end of a long linen-covered table. The breakfast salon was gilded and grand, every detail hand-painted and imported. But the chairs were half empty, and the food untouched. Ilera sat in silence, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. The pearls at her throat itched against her skin, but she didn't raise a hand to adjust them. Every movement was being watched. Across the table, the Grand Duchess dabbed her lips with a cloth napkin and said nothing. Her plum gown was crisp, her silver hair pulled tightly back, not a strand, not a thought out of place. To Alara's left, the Lady Eleanor spoke brightly, falsely. "You mustn't worry about the Duke, dear. He's always had a fondness for early morning rides. Clears his head, I expect." A murmur of agreement fluttered down the table like a practiced echo. Alara did not ask where he had ridden to or why, or what he needed to clear. She only nodded once, the way they had trained her. Someone refilled her tea without asking. Someone else passed her a basket of rolls she would not eat. The food was warm, the people were not. The corridor smelled of lavender and old stone. A servant whispered something, then backed away as Alara was ushered into the Grand Duchess's private drawing room, a place rarely touched by anyone outside the imperial bloodline. The Grand Duchess sat in a velvet-backed chair, a tea tray beside her, untouched. She didn't rise. "Sit," she said, though it didn't sound like permission. Alara obeyed. A silence grew between them, long and sharp as the line of the Grand Duchess's jaw. Finally, she spoke. 2 years, and still no heir. Are you ill, my dear, or simply inadequate?" Alara's fingers curled slightly in her lap. Her throat tightened. "I don't know, Your Majesty." "You are 18, the Grand Duchess said, examining her. 9 p.m., the evening after the confrontation with his mother. Roland retreated to a forgotten wing of the palace, a place the courtiers never entered and servants only whispered about. The fireplace was cold. Moonlight leaked through tall windows. A single oil lamp glowed dimly on the desk. The silence was thick. He was alone. The door clicked shut behind him. His steps were slow. He didn't sit. He just stood there, both hands braced on the edge of the desk, shoulders hunched, as if the wood could carry the weight he was no longer able to hide. And then he speaks, but only to himself. "What have I become? 2 years. 2 years of silence, of sleeping beside a woman who never once complained, never once asked why her husband wouldn't touch her, who made excuses for me to my mother." He laughs, low and bitter. She took the blame, looked the Grand Duchess in the eye and said she was the failure. But it was me. It was always me. He turns from the desk, pacing now, restless, haunted. I told myself I was too proud, too refined for innocence, that I needed someone worldly, commanding like the others. But what I really needed, what I was too blind to see, was her. He pauses by the fireplace, staring into the cold grate. She was there when I was ill, when I had fever from that cursed disease I earned in another woman's arms. She sat beside me, cool cloth, soft hands. She stayed, not out of duty, out of something else. Kindness, grace, forgiveness, and I gave her nothing. He sinks slowly into the armchair, face in his hands. I called myself a duke, but I've acted like a coward, a ghost, a man who couldn't bear the weight of gentleness. She is the only person in this palace who has not tried to use me, or shape me, or silence me. She saw me at my worst, and still she stayed. He looks up now, eyes wet but fierce. In vain have I struggled. No, worse. I didn't struggle at all. I ran. I turned my back on her because I was afraid she might be real, that her touch might burn through everything I'd built to protect myself. I wanted control. I chose silence. But now I hear her in every room, her voice, her footsteps, her laugh when she thought no one was listening. I taste her name in every breath, and I think I might love her. He exhales slowly, then stands. No, I know I love her. I have loved her all along. I was just too ruined to recognize it. His hand closes over the door handle. Elara sat alone in her chamber, wrapped in a shawl, the candlelight soft on her cheek. It was late. The palace slept, but her thoughts did not. And slowly, quietly, she began to speak, to herself, but really to no one. But the words come as if they've waited years. I don't know when it started. Loving him, maybe it was when he fell ill. And no one sat with him but me. Or maybe it was before that. Maybe it was when I first saw him in the garden, alone, pretending not to be. She smiles softly, sadly. Everyone else sees a duke, cold, unreachable, but I see the boy he used to be, because someone showed me. Her name was Agnes. She was his nurse, his comfort before he even knew words. She's the one who tucked him in when the Grand Duchess sent him to bed alone, the one who kissed his bruises, who sat through his tantrums, who stayed even when he didn't know how to say thank you. She looks toward the hearth, remembering. When I first came here, it was Agnes who comforted me, who saw my silence and didn't treat it like failure. She told me stories about the little boy who used to follow her like a shadow, who hated thunder and begged her not to leave at night. She told me he was always chasing love, not openly, not in words, but with every woman he ever tried to keep close. She said, "He doesn't know how to give love, child, but he's desperate to be loved. Be patient. He will find you when the noise in his soul finally quiets." And I waited. 2 years. 2 long, aching years. Her eyes glisten, but she doesn't cry. I've lain beside him and felt his breath, and nothing more. I've watched him ride out before dawn and return after dark. I've smiled when he passed me without a word, and I've told myself again and again to hold on. Because I know what he hides, and because somehow, despite it all, I love him. A pause. Her voice drops to a whisper. And I would give anything, just one night, to be his wife. Not in title, but in truth. She looks at the window, the moonlight, then a knock at the door. Firm, unhesitating. She freezes. The shawl slips from her shoulder. Her breath catches. Agnes said he'd come when he was ready. She rises slowly, but she never said it would feel like this. Then the door opened. Not gently, not as a request. He didn't wait for permission. Roland stepped into the room like a man walking into a storm, one he had stirred, one he was ready to stand in. The door clicked shut behind him. Her shawl was still slipping from her shoulder. The lamp on the table flickered. Her heart beat loud. She didn't speak. "You told my mother it was your fault," he continued, "that you'd failed me." "I only said," she began, but he raised his hand gently. "I know what you said, and I know why. Because you've always protected me, even from myself. Elara, for 2 years you've lived beside a man who wouldn't let himself feel anything real, who thought affection was weakness, that love was some indulgence to be rationed or ignored. But you stayed." He stepped closer. "You stitched my collar, sat by me when I was ill. You defended me when I gave you nothing. You saw the parts of me I've spent my life hiding, and you never ran." His voice trembled. "Do you know what that does to a man who's never truly been chosen?" She stared up at him, eyes wet. He took her hand. "I see you now, Elah. I see everything. The strength in your silence, the grace in your patience, the warmth you gave me before I ever earned it. I was raised in a palace where love was a performance, not a promise. My mother taught me discipline, but you taught me mercy without even trying." He exhaled, like a weight dropped from his chest. "And I'm sorry. Not because it's what you deserve to hear, but because it's the truth. I came here not as a duke, but as a man who has failed and fallen and finally understands what love is. And I love you. If you'll have me now, if there's still room for me to try again, I will never let go of your hand." She blinked, then whispered, "I was never holding out my hand. I was holding out my heart." He stepped into her arms. She didn't resist. Their foreheads touched, and for a long, quiet breath, nothing moved but the candlelight. Then he kissed her, not as a husband performing duty, but as a man finally freed from his own silence. That night, they undressed, not as strangers, but as people who had finally come home. The candle burned low in her chamber. Outside, snow fell like secrets no longer whispered. Inside, the Duke and the girl, no longer strangers, no longer afraid, had found something the court never prepared them for. Not duty, not alliance, but love. Gentle, undeniable, unforced. And in the morning, when the palace woke and servants whispered behind velvet curtains, it wasn't the gowns or gold that made people pause. It was the silence behind their door. A silence filled not with distance, but with warmth. It would take time.